Hi, so yeah, I'm Meri. I used to be a proper geek, and then I accidentally disappeared into enterprise for 10 years. So I started out a proper like hardware geek. Who's got kids? A whole bunch of you. So when I was a teenager, I built part of South Africa's first satellite. My key life lesson for you is don't let your kids do anything cool when they're young, because it's all fucking downhill from there. So when something you've sold has gone into space when you're like a gawky 13-year-old, you pretty much can't ever achieve anything that you can be proud of in life. So that's my uplifting message for the afternoon. So I'm from I studied computer science, mostly artificial intelligence, and then accidentally ended up at Procter & Gamble for a long time. So I used to do SAP, but I'm okay now, and I've done a bunch of other stuff as well. So I was at GovUK, part of GDS, helped them scale up from about 30 people to 300 in a year, which I wouldn't recommend ever doing again. And at the moment, I'm at M&S Digital doing some really quite interesting stuff with a backdrop of a really, really big system that's IBM WebSphere Commerce and needing to adapt to that as we try and do things in a more agile way. And so I kind of had both of the extremes, right? Our first 2 weeks of GovUK, we released 100 times on Her Majesty's website, which was pretty awesome and helped us really demonstrate in government that we could reduce risk by releasing a lot faster, which was not a concept they were familiar with at all. And one of my weirder kind of contributions to the UK citizenry is I bought the Badger of Deploy. I don't know who's seen the Badger of Deploy before. So at a certain point, we didn't have much of a release process, and so we had a physical token that let you, if you had the Badger, then you were allowed to deploy, and you weren't going to conflict with anybody else's deploys. I'm pretty sure it's still in use, and I still have a backup Badger in my cupboard at home, just in case somebody nicked it in a international espionage attempt to bring the website updates of the British government to a grinding halt. But the reality is we don't all have the benefit of starting greenfield. We're much more likely to go into a situation where there's existing code, there's existing systems, and we don't have the opportunity to just go, we'll just restart this in Rails, it'll be fine, which was some of the opportunity that we had on GovUK. And so I've worked on a lot of massive monolithic systems. My German is a lot better now because I had to read so much ABAP code when I was a SAP developer, and various other things as well. As a quick aside, it's not necessarily legacy. Sometimes it's vintage. So sometimes it's the amount of COBOL that's still running stuff that you, your family, and your pensions rely on in the world is quite distressing in one way. One of my university lecturers made most of his money by writing more and more efficient compilers and parsers for languages like COBOL, which was both terrifying and fascinating for us as students. We were just like, so this language is older than we are. How's that working out for you? Very lucratively. Okay, fair enough. And everybody's skeptical about that vintage thing. So what I'm going to talk about today is how do we make that move from we've got something that's maybe deployed once a year, once every 6 months, if we're lucky, once a quarter, to something that looks and feels and is a lot more like continuous delivery, having done that in a few different organizations now. And so my first thing is a bit of a confession, which is I lied in the description I gave of this talk, because I described it in a quite kind of martial way, epic battles and dreaded cab. Who's in an organization that has a change approval board? We feel each other's pain. You are my people, okay? We're all going to be just fine. That's my... and so I never meant to start a war. I just wanted to get to talk about this. So my approach to this is completely non-martial. We are not at war with our colleagues, and we need to learn to put down our swords because we're not Roman generals. Change isn't and shouldn't be war, however interesting it sounds in a talk description. You don't win if you defeat your colleagues. And I think it's a lot of what Linda was saying this morning. You don't just need compliance, you need commitment, and you're not going to get that by being like, ha, totally made you use Jenkins. That's not a healthy way to interact with people who are professionals who you respect, right? Your build went fucking red and you are a loser. No, like we wouldn't do that to our friends or our family, and so I don't know why we think that's going to be a successful tactic at work. And it's very much that attitude of like the old world is fucked and worked fine for us, and it's their problem that they can't get with the program, and we need a bit more. I really was worried that this was going to fall completely, but who knows who the Care? Does everybody know the Care Bear? Okay, there's enough Care Bear stare understanding in the room. We're good. I feel increasingly both I don't know whether I'm too old or too young or too foreign. But like some of the cultural references are always a bit interesting to. So how do we make this happen in a really non-combatant way, and how do we make it a positive cultural change for everybody, not a us versus them, we will destroy them, which is too often how we talk about this stuff. And so melting monoliths, getting from the massive thing that you have to only deploy once a year to something that feels a lot more continuous delivery, takes effort on all three fronts. You need to change the tech, you need to change the process, but you need to change the culture as well. And weirdly, I think we start with process, even if that's our view of most process people. Are there any release managers in the room? Like, there's people who are like embarrassed to admit they're release managers in the room, okay? British people, you're always lying. So typical process issues you get where you have a lot of vintage code, or recently re-vintaged code. Slow releases, you've got change approval boards, you've got lots of manual work, whether it's for your configuration, your environments. I grew up in an organization where we refreshed our SIT environment every 18 months because we couldn't find a window where no project would be screwed by us refreshing it. Does that sound like a familiar story? There's enough nods. I'm like, yeah, we need a support group for this, right? And I think we have to take some ownership for how we ended up there too, right? So the developer or product team view of CAB tends to be this, right? They are trolls with clipboards standing on the bridge stopping us doing fun stuff. Whereas the CAB view of CAB is that they're knights in shining armor stopping these barbarians fucking shit up for the customer, right? And we need to acknowledge that and get to, I don't know if you all saw this brilliant comic recently about that, just the difference in perspective is all that matters of whether it's us or them that you're talking about. And so if we acknowledge that there are people who love clipboards, but nobody likes being the troll on the bridge. That is not what anybody wrote when they were 6 years old, when somebody said, what do you want to be when you grow up? They weren't like a division in the class between astronaut, fireman, and troll on a bridge holding a clipboard, stopping developers having fun. Like, nobody selected that as a career. And so people who are release managers, who are change approval guys, they are trying to protect their business and their customers. And we've given them a lot of reason to do that, right? We have ended up with people acting as regression tests because we have. So if you want to know everything that has gone wrong in an organization, in every previous deployment in the history of time, all you have to do is read the change management process checklist. If you want to know what the CAB cares about, those are all the things that almost destroyed the company in the past, right? So when you find that your code has to go for a performance review to a team that you don't think know anything about performance, or has to go through an accessibility testing suite, or has to go through 17 forms of QA, those are the sins of the past. We've ended up writing down a process instead of having proper regression tests. And I think we have to own that, right? We have to start fixing that. And they're often a reaction to our users being both our monitoring and our alerting and the receivers of all of the pain of those processes that have ended up with these big releases that often go pretty badly wrong. for anybody who was in the earlier session with the train that came through the wall at the station. We've done that to our organizations an awful lot over the years. We're kind of known for it in a lot of organizations. And so helping make that better is something we've got to do and we've got to own. Because we've let them down and we've betrayed their trust. And so we go into these organizations and we're like, well, why won't you trust me to deploy once a day? Well, because when you deploy every 6 months, you bring the entire business to a grinding halt, and you break more things than than you fix. Oh yeah, it's kind of fair, I suppose. But I want to do it faster. Okay, and so when we look at it from that perspective, the thing to start doing is to start getting better at making our impact on our organizations and our businesses less before we demand that they wholesale change what they do and how they do it. And so I'm very strongly of the opinion that we have to stop the release death spiral. We have to stop bundling so much up together because releasing is so hard and so difficult and so high risk that you end up doing 3 months of QA that doesn't find things because our environments don't match, that then causes problems in production anyway. There's a reality of needing to just stop this terrible cycle and move back to something that's more healthy. And I'm going to stop berating us all now and move on to how we do that. And so rather than going to your trolls on the bridge and treating them like bureaucratic imbeciles, let's earn their trust back. And we do that by fixing technology first. And we keep those release management processes and those cabs in place because nothing makes them happier than being able to be less needed and be less needful of the 27-step process in future. But we have to do that by gaining their trust. And so where I've moved organizations previously from being deploy once every 6 months to at least trying to deploy monthly, if not weekly, we start by keeping release management and keeping cab in place. You had a question?
Yeah, so if you're going to cab, if you're keeping the cab sessions, are you going to cab every week? And what happens if they don't run every week and they only run bi-weekly?
So they run as often. My experience is that if you can go to them and go, I'm not bringing you something half-baked, I will follow your process, and here's what I'm doing behind the scenes to make it more likely that you can say yes, they're very amenable, and the reality as well is, how many people have a 6-month deployment that isn't interspersed with quite a lot of emergency and urgent changes all the way through? Organizations that deploy once every 6 months, they don't have cabs that meet once every 5 months, right? They have a whole bunch of stuff going through in emergency and urgent changes, which shouldn't have to go through in that way because we should be able to do things in a safer way. Yeah, you can, and so I think the key point is if you work with the existing processes and go, I own that we haven't been keeping up our end of the deal so far, we'll make sure that you feel safer before we ask you to stop doing so much of this, then that tends to make the cultural change happen much more successfully. And the thing to start with, in my humble opinion, is testing. Please automate your testing. Please automate your testing. Start automating your testing. It's good if you can start knowing when you've broken things. It's great if you can automate your testing. Please, for the love of God, automate your goddamn testing. Because if we can't put our hands on our hearts and go, I know I haven't broken anything with this change that I've made, we've got no right to be making that change. We're doing the wrong thing for our users, for our business, for the people who are sat with us, who have to explain. Like, you sit with customer services for 5 minutes and just hear the pain that they are in after that 6-monthly release that actually doesn't go brilliantly. And it really brings home how much better we could be doing for the rest of our organizations. And so start with automating at least some stuff. Know what you're breaking. And this is hard. And there is absolutely a trade-off between whether you go, which bit of the testing pyramid you go in, and is it right to unit test, or do you need UI testing first, or how are you going to really replicate what business QA would do? And all of those things are true. But do the hard stuff because it's what's going to make a real difference. And if you go to cab and say, we have testing now, it all passed, and that release doesn't cause critical incidents, they immediately are more amenable to the next time that you come with a change, because you've shown that you value what the business values, you value not fucking things up for our users, and you're taking steps to make sure that when you say it's done, it is really done, and it's not gonna mess things up. And then all of the other stuff can come in. It depends on your situation, what order you do it in, right? So atomic version control absolutely helps. Being able to know exactly what's in an environment absolutely helps. Getting your configuration of your environments into code rather than having to manually do anything is helpful. Making it possible not just to stand up an environment, but to stand up an environment that is high fidelity. It's representative of reality. And so when you see folks starting to do cloud environments, but production is completely different, you have to question. Sometimes that's the right thing to do, but sometimes you're continuing the cycle of testing in a way that's not representative of what you're actually going to put live. And so how do we solve those problems? And there's a lot of much better tooling now. There's a lot of things around how you manage data within those. How do you do data refreshes? I know I certainly, when I was still running finance systems, Procter & Gamble, ended up much more aware of things like tax law and PII and what was confidential in the eyes of the company and what wasn't, because in order to make environments that were representative enough for us to trust the testing we did in them, we had to have data that was representative of reality. If you can't have data that's representative of reality because your lower environments are not highly enough secured to have real financial transactions in them, you're immediate. So these are not just technical challenges; they're also policy challenges. They're business challenges, and depending on the sector you're in, whether you've got PII or PCI compliance to worry about, you'll end up needing to know a lot more about the legal and process and business stuff than anywhere else. Brilliant. Fitbit would like to update. Excellent. That's not helpful. And we're back. Cool. How about not writing software that does that to somebody in the middle of a presentation, right? So remember, it is great to get things out of people's heads. The guy in the corner who it's only in his head how we stand up a new environment, and that's why we haven't done one in 3 years. How do you inspect your current environments to understand how they're configured and whether that's correct? How do you judge whether something is really representative of live? And how do you give folks on the tooling and the ops side the ability to have the same feedback cycles that we need on the dev side? And so something where my team right now are experimenting with is things like using Cloud Foundry to be able to give our ops team or our DevOps, et cetera, guys, giving them the opportunity to stand up an environment to test whether the change in release process is going to work as we expect, rather than always having to do that in our actual set of environments and risking those. And how do you do that data refresh work? And then I think the rest of it comes as you've started to build up more of the trust. When you can trust your environments, and when you know what you're breaking, it's a lot easier to then go, okay, we want to change the architecture around a little bit. We want to move to a more service-oriented approach. We want to have looser coupling rather than harder coupling. But I think a lot of what I see is organizations trying to do this work as big program project work where we're going to spend the next 3 years making everything available via API. And that gets canned because it doesn't meet any business need along the way. It doesn't necessarily help things as you go along. So figuring out how to do the right thing but have some immediate benefit as well as some long-term benefit is something that tends to differentiate organizations that do well along this path and those that don't. If you've got a little team off on the side, making things better only in one space, only for themselves, and they're not actually making the customer experience, the user experience, the business experience any better, that's the first thing that's going to get cut from the budget when the inevitable hard times arrive. Whereas if you can build this stuff in to make it better along the way, make the existing work more reliable, it tends to work a lot better. And again, we all talk about knowing that big design up front is not necessarily the smartest thing to do, and that having an epic 74-page architecture document, I've actually had to review a 74-page architecture document before, but I can still read. I survived, so it's not impossible. But moving that out of discussions all being in these crazy documents that you're having to do supplier agreement and supplier negotiation around, to being able to go, let's make this bit better, and we'll see where it goes from there. There are times when you will do dirty hacks to make things better short term. Make sure you put an expiry date on those dirty hacks. And so my team right now, we're doing some work with M&S Digital, and it's actually great. Have got quite a lot of stuff that we can get at through APIs. A lot of the functionality is available. For some of it, it's not, and so we're having to use a bit of a hack to do some pseudo APIing for some of the functionality that's not otherwise available. And that's fine, because we can get it up, we can deliver some value with it, but that comes with a active discussion pretty much every week of, we have to make this dirty hack go away. It's gonna, we cannot let that live on forever. And as somebody who moved role a lot in my enterprise IT career, and inherited the shell script that nobody really understands, but if it doesn't run on time every month, the world might actually end. Expiry dates on these things are really important, right? When I joined P&G, there was a system called Cosmos, which at the point I joined, which was quite a long time ago, put it that way, it was meant to have been decommissioned 10 years prior to when I arrived. I think it finally got decommissioned when I had been at the company 8 or 9 years. And so it was 18 years past its expiry date. And it probably had its expiry date extended a couple times before I arrived as well, which was interesting. So it's fine to do things that are short-termist, that are pragmatic, that are sensible, but if you don't actively talk about it and have a plan, you're leaving tech debt in landmine form for somebody to stumble across one day when it fails. I've worked with a bunch of organizations now where they have mainframes running proper business critical code that they don't have a copy of the source code anymore. And so, there's a few we know that. And so you can end up with systems that genuinely you've got to keep that box running, or you're screwing everybody. Which particularly when you work for a company where, Procter's interesting in that a lot of US pension funds rely on the P&G stocks quite heavily. And so even if you don't really care about Ariel or Fairy or the products that are being sold, the fact that there's a lot of pensioners who are going to be in a lot of trouble if you don't deliver the financial results to Wall Street on time because the stock price is going to tank is the kind of thing that wakes you up in the middle of the night freaking out a little bit. But I'm okay now, honest. But the other thing here is don't wait for permission to improve things. We know that we are shit at estimating as an industry, right? We're not good at it, and nobody trusts our estimates anymore anyway. And so there's nothing to stop you going, every time I talk about doing this feature, let me think about how I would make that area better as well. Let me think about how I would sneak in some of the improvement that we need. Because if you leave re-architecting or making continuous deployment possible, or making service-oriented architecture happen to we'll wait till we've got the funding for the big program, it ain't never going to happen. And so how do you make it happen along the way? Does everybody know the Boy Scout rule? Just kind of leave it better than you found it. And again, I think a lot of people are like, I've got to deliver this feature really, really fast. If you, as a team, adopt a value of we want to improve things as we find them, it's a lot easier to justify that extra day on that feature, that extra bit of time helping make the tooling better. And so building improvement in is something that really does make a big difference. And then you're not having to go in and sell everybody on the new approach up front. You can just let people notice that things seem to be less fucked up in the order management system these days. What's that about? Oh yeah, we've been fixing stuff along the way for the last 6 months, and yeah, we haven't had a critical incident in 3 months, and that's pretty cool. And then you find people will come and talk to you about how you did that, and then they will come and ask you for help to make that happen elsewhere, which tends to be much more successful if they're already wanting to make that change and they come to you for help, than if you went in and tried to sell them on the, stop what you're doing now, everything that's familiar to you is wrong, let me tell you how to live your life. There's a great article about refactoring and using that approach in refactoring, that every time you find something that needs to be made better, let's make it better, rather than having lots of separate refactoring stories in your backlog. And you can extend that into your actual, your big blob of system that has to be all deployed at the same time. Figuring out how you can compartmentalize that. So even if all of this functionality remains in one thing, how can we make different parts of that start to talk to each other in a more contractual way, in a more API-driven way? How do we start our basket and checkout interacting with our finding products and adding them to basket in a way that's a bit more like they're two separate systems and an API? And then you can have much better conversations about how we are confident that this change is not going to destroy the world. One of the patterns it's probably an anti-pattern, right? One of the things I see happening that worries me a little bit is you start to see bigger organizations going, we want to run some of those hack day things, so we should totally have some of those API things because that you need them for those hack day things, right? And then people work for us for free, right? That's how it works. And they'll just sort of slap an API layer on the top of whatever they've got, and nobody internally will consume that API ever. And so they don't know when it breaks. They don't keep aware of what changes are being made to it. And so when you can start to move things around to be self-consuming, so if you're going to make this side of your monolith talk to that side of the monolith through some sort of interface, make that the API that then gets exposed as well, and help teams to believe in eating their own dog food. I couldn't leave that out, it's just too adorable. Look for those strongly coupled bits of your architecture, make them more loosely coupled. Like, none of this is rocket surgery, right? It's just about which order you approach it in and how you slowly build the momentum. There was a brilliant article recently about design and the context of being a designer in an organization, and which are the gigs which you're going to feel like you achieved so much, and which are the ones where you kind of felt like you smashed your head against the wall for 11 to 15 months and then finally gave up. And the analogy they used was it's a lot like surfing. So the mechanics of surfing are pretty, and I grew up in Cape Town, so that I appreciate in the UK that's maybe not the best analogy to use. I wouldn't go in the Thames either, for the record. I'm not sure there's enough waves either. But with surfing, the mechanics of surfing are pretty easy. Like, you have to learn to get up on the board fast enough, and you have to learn to not fall off when there's a wave underneath you. That's about it. The difference becomes choosing what's the wave that's worth getting up on the board for. And I think a lot of this is about creating that momentum so that you can get farther with each new change that you make. How do you create the environment for change that's going to be more effective? There's other talks here today and generally about improving your monitoring. If your users are how you find out that stuff is broken, fix that shit, yo. Right? What's the minimum thing that you can do every time you get a major incident that was reported to you by a user having a problem? You add the monitoring that lets you know that happens the next time. every time you have an incident that you fix with probably an urgent or a critical ticket, if you're in an ITIL style organization, you don't let the fix go in until you've also got the tests that are going to make sure that we know if we ever cause that again. And so put the work into making sure that your cabs, your change approvers, your release management guys aren't human regression tests. We have the power. We can write regression tests in code, and we should do that rather than making it the responsibility of humans. And so focus on earning back trust, and it's a hell of a lot easier to move to releasing more frequently when you've made releasing safer and less risky. And I absolutely agree that big releases are inherently more risky, but you can make things better before you then go, and now we have to do smaller releases as well. You can prove that you can make things more reliable, more robust, and more effective before you then make your releases more frequent and similar. So when I was much more junior in my career and still in the world of SAP, I ended up responsible for what was called consignment and self-billing, which is basically when you go, I know what with physical goods, I know what I ordered, I know what I received. Why do I wait for an invoice from the supplier that then might not match what I know I ordered and I know I received? Why don't I just produce the invoice for them and then I can pay them, and then we never have any, we don't have any discrepancy. The first thing, the two things I was horrified to find relatively fresh out of uni with all of my idealistic development ideas was that there was no testing whatsoever. And so we had 100 open tickets in incidents and problems, and 64 of them had been caused by the last 3 releases that they had done, which it was a quarterly release cycle at the time. And so the fact that we didn't know what we were breaking, and we were making it worse every time we tried to fix things, was quite disheartening for kind of little grad me. The other thing that was really worrying was that, so SAP are a German company. SAP's vanilla implementation of both consignment and self-billing was not legal in the EU. And so I ended up having to learn enough EU tax and movement of goods law to figure out how to make SAP's own systems legally compliant, which I still have nightmares about. So I wouldn't recommend it as a first job out of uni for anybody. But what we did there was we went in and it was just like, okay, everything is burning, everything is on fire. I don't want to just slowly melt away here. And we didn't try and change any of those processes, but we just tried to follow them and be more robust. And at the point where we had done 2 releases, where we had caused no new problems, and we had closed, over 25 tickets in each of those by just making stuff genuinely better. We had done a load of refactoring, we had added a load of testing, we had made things actually seriously safer. It was a very easy conversation with our release management folks and with our change approval guys to go, we think we could do this more often, and then our users would feel like things were getting better faster. And their response when we asked for monthly was, would you like to do fortnightly, which was not something that I'd ever experienced before. But you have to earn the trust that you care about the things that they care about, that you're not regarding them as trolls on the bridge, but as defenders of the realm, before you're going to be able to have those conversations. And so we need to build cultures that value getting new stuff out the door and making sure that we provide a reliable and quality experience. And there's a lot of dev teams that would say that they value both of those things, but their actions don't indicate it to be true. And I think that's the risk of what somebody referred to earlier as the C word. Culture does matter with this stuff. And I think there's a great book called Drive, which is all about what motivates people. There's another book called First Break All the Rules, which I'm a geek and a manager and a bit of a geek about management. I love First Break All the Rules because it's one of the properly data and research-based things, and kind of into management science in a real way. Like they genuinely went and looked at high-performing organizations and other organizations who were within the same company. So, why is this restaurant so much better than all the other ones in the chain? Is it just because they're in a great location, or is it something that they're doing differently? And so that there is some management science to be had, and it's worth looking at. A kind of space for people where people feel they can be awesome. They believe in what they're doing and in why, what the purpose is. They get a say in what. And I think a lot of folks who leave technology roles, that they feel like they don't have that autonomy. They can't make things better. There's too much in their way. They end up, you can feel proud of your mastery of how you're doing things, but also you feel like you're included, that you're with your tribe, you feel like you can be yourself and be successful. And so the other part of this kind of cultural change, and Linda had loads of great stuff to say about the kind of fallacies around the myths, but a lot can be solved by helping people realize that they're treating their colleagues as trolls on the bridge when actually they're defenders of the realm. A lot can be improved by somebody, and it doesn't have to be somebody senior, but it often helps if it is, standing up and saying, we are all trying to do the same thing here. We're trying to do fast and high quality. We're trying to do better and robust. And then letting folks have a say in how they work, kind of going in and demanding everybody move over to doing things in a different way, as I said this morning, might get you compliance, but it won't get you commitment. And also enable the ways of working that people are proud of. I know I, for a number of years, would come to conferences like this and go back just shaking my head and being sad that I'd learned something cool that I had no chance of getting to happen in my own organization. Which is what led me to going and understanding a lot more of the psychology and a lot more of the management science side of things, of how do I convince people that change isn't just terrifying, change isn't just risky, but it might help us make things better. And some of that was disguising change as other things. Some of it was doing it and then people noticing that something was better and asking how that had happened. A lot of it was baking cake. To the cookie thing this morning, when I joined Government Digital Service, there were a lot of really good people, and a lot of them didn't know each other, and didn't know what, left hand didn't know what right hand was doing. And I went and quite deliberately made friends with somebody in every different part of my organization that I was leading, and started asking them what cake they wanted. And I lived in Newcastle and commuted into London every week, and so on a Sunday afternoon I would bake for the team. And it didn't take long before I'd come in on a Monday morning, and it was like kind of a mama duck with chicken, like with chicks behind her. This little line of people who they knew that there was cake coming because they'd been asked what they wanted, right? So they knew that there was chocolate fudge brownies this time, and there might be some cheesecake and whatever. And if you go back, even now, 3 years later, there's an informal network still that is essentially who was stood together in a line in the tiny, tiny kitchen that we had, waiting for cake. And that's why one of the ops developers is best friends with one of the content design managers, because they ended up in this kind of informal cake network that might have been me just being nice, and might have been me being a bit Machiavellian, right? But helping people to just lift their heads up and see outside their space, and be proud of collaborating as well. And so it's also about that creating space where people can be themselves and be successful. One of the best tests of whether your organization is really diverse is whether a bunch of different people look at it and go, yeah, I don't have to pretend to be something other than I am in order to be successful here. When you look around and everybody senior is the same, or everybody is the same, it's pretty understandable why somebody looks at it and goes, well, yeah, maybe that's not the place for me. This is one of the tech arcs at GDS. He's still there. Is a guy called Paul Downey, who does these great doodles, and that helping teams to feel like teams, and to value what they achieve together rather than feeling like they have to prove that they're an individual hero, is something that makes a big difference as well. I very strongly believe that teams are strongest when they have kind of a wide range of skill sets and backgrounds and experiences. There's lots of data to back that up. Data's not going to convince you, but there is good science. There's good reasons to believe that, but one of the most powerful things you can do is to figure out how you grab a set of people who've got different viewpoints and get them working together on something. And again, sometimes that is something you just do. Don't ask. Just do it and apologize later if somebody gets upset. When I was trying to find a picture for this, and I found that actually, on the other hand, stock photos are funniest when you make everybody jump in the air and look uncomfortable. Isn't that not, like, that is just the best, worst stock photo in the history of the universe, right? Like, I particularly love this guy who looks like he might be in kind of a terrorist video about to be executed, but they've made him go on a trampoline. That's how terrified he looks. If you look at his face, it's just like, wow, he really does not want to be there. Cultural change is really hard, this is one of these books which I have to, every time I read it, I have to kind of put all of my bullshit detection and just suppress it like this, like really try and hold it down, because it feels really hokey to read a kind of, it's like a children's story, but it's really management aphorism and all the rest of it. But it's actually genuinely quite good and quite interesting. Cotter writes some interesting stuff about making change happen. The actual 8 lessons he had, I know in a primarily UK audience would have made you all come out in hives, so I've translated into what we would say. So making cultural change is about making that sense of urgency happen, but urgency is different from fear. Urgency is different from uncertainty. And so helping a small team feel like making a change happen soon would be really helpful is the first step. Getting a broader team or a diverse team to give a crap about it. So who's the guy who's in sales who you need to just have a chat with him and go, hey, would it be good for you if we could make features come out every 2 weeks rather than every month? Or would that cause you comms problems or whatever? Looking outside your immediate circle. And it's great to paint that picture of the future that people can believe in, but also it's going to take us a while to get there. So it's not a promise you're making, it's a destination that we're going to travel to together. Make sure people know it really shouldn't be a little team in the corner that never shares anything, that's doing stuff in this wildly exciting, new and different way, because that just breeds resentment. And give people the opportunity to help without trying to make the change happen everywhere all at once. And so there's, have somebody who happens to know loads about how we're currently doing things in our archaic way, have them come sit with the team for a week and see if they can help document some more stuff. They don't have to be changing it, they can just be contributing. It's useful for the momentum, for the, with the surfing analogy, showing that there are good waves to catch. I know that my second least favorite management term is low-hanging fruit. My least favorite management term is I was once in a conference call where somebody genuinely said, let's double click on that, meaning let's go into more detail. I still feel dirty today about that. I'm like, I was there when that was said. I'm not okay with that. I apologize if I have insulted. But having grown up in a big American company, but being big but not American, I find some of those things a little squick-worthy. But there is a lot of value in showing that it works. And that's not to go, look at our new saviors and heroes, let us applaud them and bow and scrape and grovel. But just going, yeah, they did a thing and it seems to be working for them, maybe we should go talk to them. And it's not about holding up that one team that's doing it better and going, y'all are idiots for not being like them. It's going, they're doing something different. You might want to chat to them. When people come to you on their own, they are much, much more likely to genuinely want to make that change, and that change is much, much more likely to be genuine and lasting. And this stuff is really, really hard, and it takes years. But if you look at an IT estate that took 40 years to create, it's kind of crazy to think you can change that in 4 months, right? Help yourself and your team stop and go, yeah, this month is better than last month. Like we caused less stuff to go wrong in prod with this last release than in any release previous. That's awesome. But know that it's probably going to take a few years to make that kind of major change if you have a big legacy estate that you're trying to bring modern tooling to. But the payoff is immense because once you've anchored that different way of working and that openness to change that genuinely makes a difference, you'll find people are a lot more willing to try new things if they know that it's not just because it's new, but because it's having the actual benefit in business terms, in team terms, in for the users and for the organization. I think that there's a wonderful but really common, hugely naive view that we have that the stuff we build today won't end up legacy. The stuff we build today is so much better, and it's going to be so much more maintainable, and it's going to be so much more deployable. And we're not recreating the problems of the past at all. But we thought that 2 years ago with the last platform, or if you're working in JavaScript 2 weeks ago with the last platform. Sorry. And so I think we need to be realistic about this underlying belief or assumption that we have that we can just keep stuff going. And I'm quite calm about it today, but I get quite irate about that. I get irate about people thinking that they can just, like, every time something new comes along, they'll get the budget and the time, and it's going to be okay because we can just rebuild the whole thing. Best cat gif on the internet, and I know that. I say that knowing the standard, right? And so my kind of parting thought is this is all worth doing. Don't give up on your organization because they have vintage code. Don't give up on an organization that has a cab. They are knights in shining armor sometimes. They're not always trolls on the bridge. Change is hard, but it's worth doing because if anything that works will keep being used, systems will live longer than expected. Nobody expected that Access database that runs under the desk over there that 4 office moves ago belonged to the ops guy who was really great at VB scripting and Access databases. Nobody thought that was what our financial result template production was going to be running on, but it is. And you probably, in the next little while, will do something manually in a Jenkins setup or write a makefile or create a little script to just clean up the database stuff as we pull it over from one place to another. And in 15 years, you will be somewhere else doing something completely different, and you'll have this weird feeling up and down your spine because somebody is cursing the day you were born because you left them this thing. And so treat everything like it's our future, our long-term future. Build robust shit that keeps going and is maintainable. Don't leave a mainframe running something with no access to the source code. Please, God, don't do that again. But because we can't always know the future use of stuff that's being built, right? That these monoliths have ended up existing beyond their planned obsolescence date. It's not like Apple, who can just make the device stop working because they update the OS on it, right? We can't predict the future, and so we need to build stuff as well as we can and plan for the fact that other people are going to maintain it long beyond when we think is sensible. But that's part of being a professional. It's part of being a good citizen in our industry. It's part of being good at what we do is to make sure that we enable future generations not to curse the day we were born, and know that the next big thing is probably something completely different from what we're doing right now, and we're gonna be the ones going, really? I just got my head around how this thing works. You want me to change it now? And so be generous with people when they need to take some time to make a change, and make sure you lead with, doing what the standard is, but do it better, do it safer. And help people to see the way that the future will be better, rather than just trying to convince them that they really should believe in this blog post that you read. And you'll win. Cool. Thank you very much. And I think we have not very long for questions. 10.
I got a question.
Mhm.
May I ask? We always talk about the systems that are better designed, non-maintainable, hard to deploy, buggy, millions of dollars left. Do we know the opposite examples? Of,
Can you repeat the question,
say, 10 years old system that has been designed 10, 15 years old, and it's still maintainable, no bugs, everything in control, deployable every week.
So I have seen them, but they are mostly where they've been watered, they've been gardened. So they're where an organization has realized how important they are. They've often gone back and retroactively made sure that there's a really good testing suite that they can really refactor without screwing stuff up. And that's why I always lead with testing, because I think when you can change something and know whether you've broken things, that is immensely powerful. And it actually makes a much bigger difference than if you can, shorten the build cycle by 90%. Doing something a lot faster, but it's still going to break production is not helpful. And so I have seen it. The other example is safety critical systems. So one of my old bosses at Procter was ex-Navy, and he would talk about how it really disappointed him that we ran the global finance systems for a major corporation, and when he'd been fresh out of university doing his time in the Navy, he'd been able to start the tests running on and this was 30 years ago. He could start the tests running on a Friday and come in on the Monday and know what needed fixing before that change could be deployed, and we weren't in that position. And so I think you see some examples of it in safety critical stuff. Often it's because somebody's realized that pulling this thing out is going to be economically unviable, and so making it something that is possible to keep running is important. But they're often the things you won't hear about if you go into an organization. They're the things that keep quietly running well in the background and don't need constant projects to bring them up to date or to upgrade them or to make them safer. So that they are there. They're not often in Git repos, but they are kicking around.
In a way, we better recognize the need to improve now more widely and in a way change the world and adapt to those good examples that were, or adhere to those good systems that were built.
But I think we also have an attitude as an industry that we would look at that and go, well, you can't deploy it to the cloud in 30 seconds, and so I think it's shit. Even though they've had nothing that went wrong in the last 14 years, which is before the framework you're advocating was a glimmer in somebody's eye. And so I think we're sometimes a little harsh about those as well. So not everything needs to be doable in the way that we would do it if we were starting right now, but we don't all have the benefit of greenfield. Most of us will be working with stuff that already exists, unless you repeatedly leave and start your own company, which we have a bit of a tendency to do in our industry, right? But I think there's seeing whatever good is available to see is important as well, and we're not necessarily an attitude that we have when we go into organizations. Yeah.
I have a question. So, purpose, autonomy, mastery, and inclusion. I just wanted to know where the points came from, because they're very, very similar to positive psychology and motivation psychology, which is used in game design.
Yeah, so the top three are from Drive, Dan Pink's book, which is a summary of those kind of the various bits of research that have been done in those areas. And then the inclusion part is more, if you look at Drive, the part that it doesn't cover of First Break All the Rules, which is the Gallup, very data-based look at what cause teams to be really high performing. The bit that it doesn't cover is that kind of inclusion. If anybody's ever had an employee engagement survey that has the question, do I have a best friend at work? That's Gallup based. And it's an interesting question, right? Because it's one that in the UK often gets interpreted as like, you're trying to force me to pick my best friend from these guys, where in other cultures it's maybe like, yeah, there are people here who I feel I could be genuine friends with, or I have a work wife or a work husband, or whatever that concept that we're talking about a lot now. And so I think it's the inclusion piece is what's not covered by that summary that Dan Pink has in Drive.
So if you have got to the point where you've evolved the monolith, you just said, we're throwing money at something that's just disappearing, but it stops with it, stops something straight away.
I have gotten to the point where we could cancel incredibly expensive contracts with SIs, but often not by throwing it away, but by getting it to the point where we actually don't need the big block because we've got ways of, okay, all we're relying on that for now is that bit of payment processing. Let's point that interface point somewhere else and have a thing that costs 1/10 of the price and is, but is serving the same function.
There's always been a case of breaking it down to something small.
I think that there's very few times when you can start over and find the space to start over completely. I think that's the world we live in. And so I think where you've got a big estate, I've seen it work much more successfully where you slowly reduce the scope of what the monolith is doing and then get to a point where you could go, okay, we're now at the point where we could replace this one big thing with 2 small things because everything else has already been moved, which makes contract renegotiation a really fun sport at that point. Terrifies suppliers, but it's often the right thing to do for the business.
I have another one, sorry.
I might just let somebody else first. There was a hand there.
I was just wondering.
And I'm ignoring this side of the room. I will come back to you guys in a sec.
If you have any thoughts on working with distributed teams and managing cultural change across teams from different cultural backgrounds?
So actually, GDS was the first time I'd ever had all my team in one place, and it was kind of weird for me because I'd grown up in a big international organization and I'd had my teams in not just multiple places but very, very different time zones. So when you've got, I had a team where I was in Newcastle with some of the team, a whole bunch of folks in San Jose, Costa Rica, a whole bunch more in Manila in the Philippines, which as an aside really brings things into perspective when you're on a conference call and at the one end they've got such severe floods that they're having to evacuate the building but they're still on their mobile phone contributing to the conference call, and on the other side they're like, just a second, there's an earthquake, we've just got to be under the table, it'll be all right in a minute, but keep working through that. And like in Newcastle there's like two inches of snow and everybody goes home. It's a very different kind of commitment to the working day in the face of natural disaster kind of thing. So I think that there's 2 things. One is making sure that you don't only communicate with the people you can see, and the other is being aware of cultural difference is really important. And there is a lot of my time where I had those 3 cultures, and Geordies are of the most upbeat of UK folks, I would say. I think that's not unfair. But the default answer in the UK is nope. And then the expectation is that you need to convince. The default answer in both Philippines, and I'm going to grossly overgeneralize, but the default answer in Philippines and in Manila, and in San Jose was yes. And the Filipino yes meant, I'm not necessarily sure how I'm going to do it, but by God, we're going to get something done. And so you could completely rely that something would be done, and so it became about making sure that the expectation of what needed to be done was really the same. And again, that the onus is on communication and making sure that how do you plan that change so that you can see the change happening and be able to course correct if needed. Costa Rica is one of my favorite countries in the world. They had in a wave of pacifism post World War I decided to stand down their army. They've never had one since, and they thought they were going to be the beginning of this wave of pacifism sweeping the globe. And so conflict is not okay, or direct confrontation is really not okay. The kind of Pura Vida is the country slogan, which is good life, pure life, good life. And so the answer will always be yes. That yes might mean, yep, got it, done. And that yes might mean, you're a fucking moron, I'm not doing that. But you've put me in the culturally inappropriately position of having to tell you no. And so I'm going to be polite and not make you realize that you've made such a terrible mistake of making me tell you no. And so one of the things that you have to do is realize that when you're working, there are a bunch of, and I could talk for hours about cultural differences and how you manage effectively with them, so I will not, and Steve will glare at me, and he's very tall. But there are some key things, like, are you talking in a culture where hierarchy matters, and so it is insubordination to disagree with the boss? If you have a boss who goes, here's my idea, and sits back and waits for people to argue, that is a problem with their style of interaction, not that every other culture in the world has to be okay with a culture of argument. And so helping people go, so what do you think, team? Rather than, here's my idea, I now expect you to shred it, is one of the things. And then the other is, there's a key distinction between whether a culture is where the onus is on the speaker to be understood or the listener to make sure they understand, and that plays out a lot in those kind of teams as well. But basically, respect the difference, figure out the difference, and then figure out what's the way that will work best for most. Be the things I'd say, and we are done. Thank you very much.